In early 1983, a message arrived at the CIA's Moscow station that startled even the most seasoned officers. It came through an improvised, dead-drop channel the agency had abandoned years earlier because the KGB had mapped most of the old communication sites. Yet the message was precise, technical, and written in the unmistakable style of someone with deep access inside the Soviet defense apparatus. The author called himself Alexander Orlov. Later, analysts would conclude with near certainty that the name was false. But the information he claimed to hold was very real. Orlov said he was prepared to defect and deliver internal planning documents from the Soviet Ministry of Defense, including notes related to pre-launch readiness procedures and strike scenario simulations used by the strategic rocket forces. If authentic, this intelligence would allow the United States to understand exactly how the USSR planned its nuclear escalation. For Washington, such insight could alter decades of strategic doctrine. But Orlov made a demand the CIA considered nearly impossible. He insisted that a CIA officer meet him inside Moscow, not abroad, not through intermediaries. He wanted direct contact, proof of commitment from the Americans. The CIA rarely agreed to such terms. Moscow was considered the hardest target in the world. Every American diplomat was surveilled from the moment they stepped out of the embassy. A Western intelligence officer had almost no hope of moving around undetected. The KGB's 7th Chief Directorate, responsible for physical surveillance, ran overlapping teams that monitored foreigners around the clock. A single deviation from routine could expose an entire operation. Yet Orlov's credibility was too strong to ignore. He mentioned an internal directive concerning the reorganization of the Soviet early warning system, something so secret that even many Soviet generals had not yet received the final briefing. The CIA's technical division later confirmed that the terminology and classification markers in his message matched authentic Soviet formatting. Whoever he was, he had access. Washington convened a closed session. 3 possibilities were discussed. Orlov was genuine, and the CIA had an unprecedented opportunity. Orlov was a KGB provocation designed to expose CIA officers operating in Moscow. Orlov was genuine, and the KGB already knew. In the end, the potential value outweighed the risk. The operation was given the codename Silent Pin and assigned to a single officer, David Harper, a young but exceptionally skilled operative trained under the highly restrictive Moscow rules, the set of survival principles that govern CIA activity. In the Soviet capital, Harper had one task: to locate Orlov and extract him to the safety of the U.S. Embassy without triggering the KGB's surveillance net. What Harper didn't know was that the KGB had already activated an internal alert. For months, they had monitored unusual movements inside the Ministry of Defense. They didn't know who the mole was yet, but they knew someone was preparing to betray the state. The program the KGB launched was called Vector, a counterintelligence sweep designed specifically to identify high-value insiders communicating with foreign intelligence. And the moment the CIA agreed to Orlov's terms, Silent Pin and Vector began moving toward each other on a collision course. David Harper arrived in Moscow under diplomatic cover on a cold January evening in 1983. As soon as he stepped out of Sheremetyevo Airport, he felt it, the invisible pressure that every CIA officer described the same way. Moscow watches you breathe. The KGB didn't hide their presence. They made sure every American knew they were being followed. It was psychological warfare before the real game even began. Harper's first days were routine. He took the same path from the embassy to his apartment, visited predictable diplomatic receptions, and made no deviations from the schedule his KGB watchers had already memorized. This predictable pattern was essential. Only after the KGB was fully convinced he posed no threat could he begin to move freely. According to the Moscow rules, no officer should ever assume they had lost surveillance. The KGB's 7th Directorate used a layered system, one team trailing close behind, one rotating through nearby streets, and a third ready to replace them without ever stopping. Many foreigners believed they had shaken KGB watchers, but in reality, the watchers simply allowed them to believe it. Moscow was a chessboard where every piece the CIA moved was under observation. But Harper had an advantage. He had spent years studying the mistakes of others, the failures, the blown operations, the subtle patterns of Soviet surveillance. He memorized the Moscow rules like scripture. Never look back. The KGB expects you to check. If you think you're alone, assume you are not. Don't run. Running means guilt. Your cover isn't protection. It's a timer. The first step toward meeting Orlov required what the CIA called a redundancy. Break, a sequence of scripted, deliberately mundane errands designed to overwhelm. KGB tracking teams with repetition. One evening, Harper left his apartment at exactly 18 m, walked to a kiosk, bought the same Soviet newspaper he always bought, then returned home. He repeated this 3 times over several days. The 4th night, when the watchers relaxed into expectation, he subtly changed his gait, paused to tie his shoe, and blended into a crowd boarding a tram, a tactic designed to force a rotation between surveillance teams. From there, Harper slipped into a back alley, entered a courtyard, and passed through a delivery entrance he had scouted weeks earlier. For exactly 18 minutes, he was unsupervised, a rare gap in Moscow, and one that could not be repeated. The CIA signal to Orlov was simple. Harper would leave a piece of chalk on the left side of a specific park, bench in Sokolniki Park. If Orlov was watching, and the agency hoped he was, he would know that the meeting was ready. But Harper didn't know that. The KGB had already narrowed their list of suspects inside the ministry. Vector teams were watching parks, metro stations, libraries, and government corridors for any sign of unauthorized contact with foreigners. The KGB didn't know Orlov's name yet, but they were getting closer. On a snowy February afternoon, Harper walked through Sokolniki Park, pretending to enjoy the quiet surroundings like any other diplomat. He sat down, unfolded his newspaper, and placed the piece of chalk beneath the bench slat, brushing it off as if wiping snow from his glove. A man walking his dog paused in the distance. Too long, too still. Harper's instincts fired, surveillance, but he finished the signal anyway. That night, Orlov responded. A small scrap of paper was left in the dead drop site near a trash bin at the park's edge. It read, "I saw your sign. The danger grows. We must meet within 3 days. They are searching." This message confirmed what the CIA feared. The KGB was closing in, and if Harper didn't extract Orlov quickly, he would vanish into the Soviet system. Or worse, Silent Pin had officially begun, and Vector was already a step ahead. The snow in Moscow had turned into a gray slush by the time Harper prepared for the most dangerous step of the operation, a face-to-face meeting with Alexander Orlov. According to the CIA's internal guidelines, arranging an in-person contact inside the Soviet capital was considered a last resort, something to be done only when all other channels failed. In 1983, Moscow was the most monitored city on Earth. Every foreigner was a suspect, every movement catalogued, every deviation noted. Harper selected the location carefully, a quiet side street near the Krasnoselsky rail yard, chosen because it offered multiple exit routes and heavy foot traffic. During shift changes, the place was noisy enough to obscure nearby conversations, yet chaotic enough to complicate surveillance. Photography. It was the kind of location the old Moscow station chiefs favored, a space where ordinary Soviet workers blended into a gray wall of anonymity. But even with planning, Harper knew this meeting broke at least 2 Moscow rules. Still, the CIA had no choice. Orlov claimed to possess something extraordinary, and time was running out. If Vector identified him first, he would disappear into a KGB interrogation. Cell in the United States would lose its most valuable Soviet contact in years. At precisely 1740, Harper walked along the predetermined route, acting like a tired diplomat heading home. He carried a rolled-up copy of his Vestia, the signal for Orlov to approach. He passed a fruit stall, a cigarette kiosk, a small line of workers waiting for the tram. Everything looked normal. Then Harper saw him. Orlov emerged from a shadowed building entrance, wearing a dark winter coat and carrying a briefcase held close to his body. He looked older than Harper expected, early 50s with deep lines under his eyes. But what struck Harper most was not the man's appearance. It was the tension in his posture. Orlov walked like someone who had not slept in days. He got close enough to speak without raising his voice. "Do not look at me," Orlov murmured. "They are hunting inside the ministry. I have seen the lists. They know it is someone in my department." Harper kept his eyes forward. "Do they know it's you?" Orlov hesitated. "Not yet. But they will." He reached into his coat and discreetly handed Harper a folded sheet of thin, worn paper. Harper palmed it instantly. The technique practiced millions of times at CIA training grounds. "What is this?" Harper asked. "A warning," Orlov said, "and proof that I am not lying." Harper slipped the paper into an inner pocket. "We need to move you. You must not stay in Moscow much longer." "No," Orlov whispered sharply. "You do not understand. I cannot leave yet. I must give you the final package first. The one that changes everything." Harper's grip tightened around the newspaper he was holding. What kind of package? Harper's heartbeat quickened. If Orlov was telling the truth, this information could shift the entire balance of nuclear strategy in Washington. It would show exactly how the USSR prepared for a potential first strike, and whether the United States would have minutes or seconds to respond. One report like that could alter defense spending, early warning deployments, even presidential policy. But before Harper could ask another question, Orlov's demeanor changed. His eyes narrowed. His breath caught. "We're being watched," Orlov whispered. Harper didn't turn his head. Turning meant panic. Instead, he followed another Moscow rule. Use reflections, not movement. He angled slightly toward a tram window. In the dull glass, he saw two silhouettes lingering beside a telephone booth. They weren't talking. They weren't waiting for a tram. They were simply watching. "KGB, listen carefully," Orlov said, voice tight with fear. "I can still get the final documents. But after tonight, they will know. Vector is narrowing the search. My apartment has been inspected twice. I no longer sleep at home." Harper forced himself to stay calm. "Where is the package now?" "Hidden, locked. If they catch me, they will not find it easily." Orlov exhaled sharply. "But if they catch me, it will not matter." The tram screeched as it arrived, breaking the tension for only a second. Orlov stepped back, ready to merge into the crowd. "You will hear from me in 2 days," he said. "But if the message is late, assume I have been taken." He paused. "And if I disappear, burn everything. Do not try to find me." He vanished into the sea of workers boarding the tram. Harper remained still, counting to 10 before moving, pretending to adjust his scarf. He walked away calmly, resisting the urge to look over his shoulder. Only when he returned to a safe zone did he unfold the thin paper Orlov had given him. It contained a single line. "They are preparing a purge, and they have my name." Harper froze. Silent Pin was no longer a delicate extraction. It was a race against the KGB's deadliest counterintelligence machine. And Orlov had just become the most hunted man in Moscow. By February 1984, the CIA believed Operation Lantern was entering its final and most delicate phase. McAllister had already secured copies of several technical schematics connected to Project Sfera, but the agency still lacked the core element: a detailed breakdown of the experimental reactor's vulnerabilities. Washington insisted the documents had to be obtained before the upcoming Soviet Party Congress, where Yuri Andropov's successor was expected to accelerate the project. The KGB also felt the pressure. Colonel Vitaly Sokolov, now deeply suspicious of a mole inside the Ministry of Energy, demanded a wider net. His units began randomly stopping foreign vehicles, wiretapping Western embassies, and rotating surveillance teams every 3 days. 34 CIA assets were quietly compromised in those weeks, most without the agency realizing it. On the night of February 18th, McAllister made what he later admitted was his most serious mistake. He went to meet his key informant, codenamed Carmina, a high-ranking engineer from the Reactor Design Bureau, near the Novodevichy Cemetery. It was a location chosen for its symbolic stillness. Soviet surveillance teams rarely patrolled graveyards at night in the middle of winter. But the KGB had already predicted McAllister's patterns. 2 nights earlier, they had intercepted a partial burst, transmission from a short-range device, something they believed was linked to an American handler. They didn't have a name, just a suspicion, and that suspicion pointed toward an American diplomat with a too-clean travel pattern, Daniel McAllister. Unaware of this, Daniel approached the cemetery's western gate at 23:57. Snow drifted across the path like pale smoke. The street lamps buzzed, casting a dim orange glow. Carmina waited near the stone wall, clutching a briefcase filled with copied schematics, notes, and, most importantly, a small, hand-drawn map outlining the structural weaknesses of the prototype reactor. "This is everything," the engineer whispered. "Once they begin testing, nothing will stop them. You must leave Moscow tonight." But before McAllister could respond, a soft metallic click echoed from the darkness. A voice, cold, precise, unmistakably Russian, spoke from behind a mausoleum. "American, put your hands where we can see them." Floodlights ignited, blinding him. Shadows moved between the gravestones. 6, maybe 7 KGB officers, weapons raised. Sokolov himself stepped forward, his expression like carved ice. "Mr. McAllister," he said, "did you really think we would not see it? Every step you took in this city left footprints." Daniel didn't panic. Years of training pushed instinct over fear. He dropped the microfilm capsule into the snow with the smallest flicker of movement. The wind carried a thin veil of powder over it, just enough to hide it. Sokolov noticed the gesture. "You Americans always underestimate us," he murmured. Carmina was seized instantly. McAllister lunged, not to escape but to distract. He shoved the briefcase under a stone bench. The officers swarmed him, a sharp blow to the ribs, hands twisting his arms, snow in his mouth. The cold taste of metal as someone slammed his cheek onto a frozen gravestone. Sokolov leaned down. "History is shaped by those who control information," he said softly. "Tonight you lose your piece of it." Daniel expected the end, a bullet, a quiet disappearance. But it didn't come. Instead, "Take him alive." Those 3 words chilled him more than the winter air. The last thing he saw, before being dragged away, was a faint glint in the snow near the cemetery gate, a sliver of the microfilm capsule peeking through the frost. He prayed someone from Langley would find it. He doubted he'd live long enough to know. McAllister regained consciousness, inside a steel-walled interrogation room somewhere, on the outskirts of Moscow. There was no clock, no window, only a humming fluorescent light and the distant thud of machinery. His wrists were bound to the chair with leather straps. His head ached from the blow. Colonel Sokolov entered without a sound. "Mr. McAllister," he said calmly, "you are now in a special facility under direct supervision of the committee. No embassy, no government, no clever escape plan will reach you here." Daniel didn't respond. He watched Sokolov's eyes, gray, unreadable, but restless with a kind of grim satisfaction. "You think the United States will save you?" Sokolov asked. "They will not. Not when we reveal what you have done." For hours, maybe days, the questioning continued. The KGB didn't torture him physically. They didn't need to. They deprived him of sleep, of orientation, of any sense of reality. They asked about informants, contact methods, the purpose of the operation. And every time he refused to speak, Sokolov simply said, "We have time. You do not." What neither man knew was that the microfilm Daniel had hidden in the snow had been found. It wasn't the CIA. It was a Soviet groundskeeper doing a night shift near the cemetery. The man pocketed the capsule, assuming it was something valuable, silver or foreign-made tech. He took it home, showed it to his cousin, who happened to work as a junior technician at a ministry archives depot. The cousin recognized the microfilm structure and immediately reported it. By dawn the next day, the KGB held the capsule. Sokolov placed the metal tube on the interrogation table in front of Daniel. A fascinating device. Very American. Daniel's chest tightened. "This," Sokolov continued, tapping the capsule with a gloved finger, "contains enough classified material to justify your execution 10 times over." But instead of triumph, his voice carried something else, a trace of frustration. "You see, Mr. McAllister, we still cannot decipher the encoded section. You Americans change your ciphers too often." He leaned closer. "And someone must explain it." Daniel realized then why they were keeping him alive. Not for confession, for decryption. A bargaining chip in a larger game. But Langley already had a contingency for such situations. 1. Daniel had memorized but prayed never to face. The quiet abandonment protocol. If an operative became a liability, the CIA would distance itself completely. No negotiations, no rescue. He was alone. 2 weeks later, Sokolov received an unexpected cable from Moscow headquarters. Project Sfera was being suspended, indefinitely due to budget, restructuring and instability, in the leadership following Andropov's death. Resources were to be redirected. Foreign intelligence operations were to be deprioritized for at least 6 months. McAllister's case was now considered non-essential. Sokolov stared at the order for a long time before folding it neatly into his coat. The next morning, he entered Daniel's cell and spoke quietly. "The United States will never know how close they came to altering our future. Your operation is finished. Your agency has already erased you from their records." Daniel lifted his tired eyes. "So what happens now?" Sokolov exhaled. "You disappear. Officially, you never existed here." 2 guards escorted Daniel down a long concrete hall toward a service exit. Snow blew in through the open doorway. His heart pounded. Was this freedom or execution? Outside stood a lone truck. A driver smoked beside it. Sokolov gestured toward the passenger door. "You will be driven to the Finnish border. From there, your fate is not my concern." Daniel didn't understand. "Why let me go?" Sokolov paused, hands clasped behind his back. "Because history," he said, "is fragile. And sometimes, the best victories are the ones no one ever hears about." The truck drove for hours across frozen fields, silent villages, empty roads. Near dawn, Daniel saw a sign marking the border zone. The driver spoke for the first time. "When you cross, forget Moscow. Forget what you saw. And forget the man who let you walk away." Daniel stepped out into the snow. The truck disappeared into the white horizon. He crossed the border alone. Years later, the CIA quietly recovered a copy of the same documents from a different source. Project Sfera never materialized. Its reactor design remained buried in Soviet archives until long after the USSR collapsed. Daniel McAllister lived the rest of his life under a new identity, never returning to intelligence work. He never wrote a book, never gave an interview. He simply vanished from the world, just as the CIA had intended. And Colonel Sokolov? In newly declassified files released decades after the Cold War, one handwritten note was discovered in his personal dossier. Some enemies are worthy of respect. Some victories are better kept in the shadows. It was dated February 1984, the night he chose not to change history.